Good Woch. I'm sorry for that disruption. I'll start again. So the story was that there's someone who borrowed his father's car and he parked it on a tow-away zone on Friday. Then it was permitted. When the Shabbos morning it's not permitted, it's been towed away. Can we call a guy to take the car away? So here we have two apparently contradicting sources. In the second source on the screen, which is Shin Lamed Daled, about a fire, Chas v'Shalom, which breaks out on Shabbos. So there it says, you're not to ask a guy, you're not an instructor going to put out the fire. And the concern is because a person is panicky in a case of loss, and he's going to try to salvage what he can. And therefore, the worry is that he'll come to extinguish the fire himself. And therefore, there we put the brakes on, no extinguishing the fire. You can't call in a guy. You can say maximum, you can say kol ha'machaba einei mafsid, you can speak in indirect terms that anyone who does put out the fire will not lose out of it, but you're not allowed to give them direct instructions. On the other hand, we have the case of someone who is on Shabbos and he realizes he has with him his wallet. That's in Siman Reish Samach Vav. And so what should he do? He's got with him his money. So it says he should give it to a goy. And the reason being that because ein odamamid a person is not going to just leave his money to be hefker. And if we don't let him, we don't find a permitted way for a guy to take his money to safety. So once again, we have a case of panic. And here we say that because of the behola, because of the pressure, therefore go easy on him. So this is our dilemma. Is a case of panic reason to be lenient, or is it a reason to be strict? And there seems to be a contradiction here. In the base, there's a long entry in Bir Halacha. It's long as in at the age of 23.
Dan Ruskin, we can't hear you.
Trying to sort out this question, and he says the following. Pardon?
You're cutting out all the time.
I apologize. I can't do anything about cutting up. That's what I have. Perhaps next time I'll do it from the office, where it would be a more stable line. Kolponim. So this is where we have this question, and so you could say, okay, there's a case of a fire. There, the danger is coming by itself. In our case, you're talking in the case of the money in the pocket, that you expect him to throw his money away. That's too much to ask a person to throw his money away. And therefore, in that case, we say, ask a guy again. To say that in the first case, the fellow who has his money with him, you expect him to throw it, that you called in a guy. In the case where it's happening by itself, then leave it to happen and don't intervene. That's how some Rishonim want to say. If that's the case, in our story with the car, the tow truck is coming by itself. You're not expecting him to throw the car into the river. You tell him, don't do nothing. What happens, happens. If so, you're not allowed to call in a goy. That's how you could learn pshat. However, there is another source, the third source, and that is where actually the Bir Halacha in Bishop Brewer talks about. We have a case, a person has an animal, and the animal has got achozodam. I'm going to say it's got very high blood pressure. I don't know if that's the correct translation. But meanwhile, the animal is in danger. And the way to save it is to do a bloodletting. And if you don't do the bloodletting, which is a malacha, it's going to die. So there it says you're allowed to call in a goy to make it to extract blood. No, here it's the same thing as the case of the fire. If you do nothing, you can sit by and see the animal die. And it says that you are allowed to call in a goy. So just like you're allowed to call in a goy to do bloodletting for the animal, you should be allowed to call in a goy to take the car. You shouldn't be towed away. So then why by the fire is it different? So the Mishnah Halacha says the following. Sometimes the solution is in the case of the fire, you say in the case of the goy, you call in the goy to put out the fire. It could be that the goy won't manage on his own, and therefore you'll start helping him. So therefore, there we say you have to stay back, step back. In the case of the animal is ill, so there it's you have impulse. Once bloodletting is done, problem solved. In the case of the money in the street, you give it to the guy. Problem solved. It's not a question. It will snowball to something else. So this is the way he wants to resolve this problem. To say that we'd say that whenever there's a major risk of loss of money, then you should be allowed to call an agoy. It's only in the case of a fire. If you call an agoy, the next thing is that you'll be starting doing yourself. If that's the case, so the same thing with the car. Of course, you won't lose the car, but it's going to cost you £200 or something or more. It's going to be taken to a car pound, etc., and the loss of time, etc. It is a significant damage. Therefore, you can be makel. Then I have a thought about an animal which has got this blood problem, this hakozas da. Then we have another thing. It says in Siman Reish Samach Aleph that if during Bein Hashmoshes you're allowed to call an agoy to save you if there's a financial loss. Why? Ben Hashmoshes is a Suffolk Game, Suffolk Lilo. Okay. In the case of a Suffolk Game, Suffolk Lilo, because it's a Suffolk, you can call an agoy. If you said that you could make a major loss, you could call an agoy on Shabbos proper. Why are you telling me Ben Hashmoshes? It's always mutter because it's a major loss involved. Elamai, it's only Ben Hashmoshes, not during Shabbos. So how do you reconcile that? Yeah. So I've been going around in circles for the last week. But the only thing I can come up with is the following. There's something which is called an outright, there's a loss, and there sometimes is that it's a lost opportunity. For example, someone comes to town, so there's a ship comes to town, and it's got stuff which is a job lots which are very, very cheap. If you don't take it now, you're going to miss a significant opportunity. That is not a loss out of pocket, but it's a lost opportunity. And strictly speaking, in halacha, that's not called a hefset. That's called meniyas harevach. But possibly that's what it's allowing you in Bein Hashmoshes. That even if it is not mamash a loss out of pocket, even if it's a hefset meruba, that you're missing a significant opportunity, that is also permitted Bein Hashmoshes. That's the only thing I can think of. But I mean, I'm really struggling. How do you reconcile these things, these sources, whether you are allowed to call an agoy behefset meruba or not? Okay, let's move on. The next question which I have is a case of the Shabbos hot plate. And actually, I was asked to write an article for there's what's called the Compass magazine. It's a magazine for shluchim, and they asked to put together an article about challenges of making a Shabbos event in a hotel. So one of the things came up is in the hotel, the Shabbos kettle or the Shabbos hot plate was disconnected. And one of the Goyshe waiters, now for sure you're not allowed to ask a goy to switch it on. You're not allowed to ask a goy to light a fire that you should have food. Make it clear. To ask a goy to light a fire that you shouldn't catch a cold is mutter. To ask a goy to light a fire that you should have hot food, there's no heter for that. Here, the food is still hot. Comes along a goy, and he switches it on. Obviously, he's switching it on for the Jewish customers, for the Jewish clients. Are you allowed to now the goy switch on the fire? Are you allowed to enjoy your children 5 hours later? Had he not switched on the fire, the child would have been cold. So now are you allowed to have benefit from without being asked? So are you? It would have. He protected it from getting. You're not enjoying the malacha. He just protected it from getting cold. So actually, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he mulls over this question, and he doesn't give a clear answer. I would just venture to say that Shlomo Zalman lived in Yerushalayim, and if your hot plate goes out, you have a simple eitzah. You can go to your neighbor and put your cholent by the neighbor. That option, if you don't have that option, I can't see how you can ignore and say, I'm not having benefit. Of course you're having benefit, because otherwise you'd have a cold cholent, and now you're having a benefit from the goy's malacha. So b'pashtus, I think that's not okay. As I say, Shlomo Zalman has a discussion, but the inclination seems to be it's not okay. Let's go on to the next question on our list. I'm going to, because the connections is not so stable, I'm going to perhaps go through the questions a bit quicker, swifter, rather than, hopefully the telephone will get through the list. Okay. Can a 11-year-old girl separate challah with the bracha? So actually, this is a Mishnah. The Mishnah in the beginning of Truma is Chamisha lo yisroimu v'im tormu ein trumos on Truma. There's five categories who should not be taking Truma. And if they did, the Truma is not valid, and the rules for taking are the same as the rules for taking Truma. So therefore, if a cotton or a ktano takes Truma, it's not valid. However, it does say in Shulchan Aruch that if the child is what's called muflas samach lelv, it is called muflas samach leish, is close to his, if he would make a neder, his neder would be possibly binding. And the same thing with a girl from the age of 11, if she makes a vow, it's possible that the vow is binding, depending on our assessment how serious-minded they are. If the child is muflas samach leish, then the challah is binding, does take effect. So I'm actually puzzled with this. I haven't got a clear picture. Does an under bar mitzvah and under bas mitzvah is not chai b'mitzvah? So what is the criterion here? Is it whether you have the mitzvah or whether is it got to do with vows? And So, but the Eved, if the child over the age, a girl over 11 had taken challah, the challah would be possibly, it'd have to be certainly the chumra, you'd have to say it is challah. But on the other hand, certainly not to give the child over under bar or bas mitzvah to do the haproshes challah. Question number 4 we have is a boy who's turning bar mitzvah. So shliach, forgotten who it is. The past week he asked me that my son is turning bar mitzvah shortly. When he was 3 years old, he was involved in a life-threatening accident. Baruch Hashem is well. Should he now, when he turns bar mitzvah, should he say birchas hagoimel? Now, you remember that last week we had a discussion about delayed birchas hagoimel. I mentioned the Aruch HaShulchan mentions about the shear of that if it's a long time and you've already forgotten, it's too late to say birchas hagoimel. Others disagree with this, but that's the Aruch HaShulchan. Also, if you remember from last week, just a Hashlama, the Baruch HaShulchan said maximum 5 days. Where did you get the 5 days? So if you look in Bris Yosef, in Siman Reish Yud Tes, you'll see in 2 different Rishonim. Some say that it's up to 3 days, some say it's up to 5 days. Never mind, here we're talking about a different question altogether. A child was involved in a life-threatening accident many years ago. Now he's turned to Birchas Hagoyim, turns bar mitzvah. Now the answer is the following: that a child does not say Birchas Hagoyim for the simple reason that the lashon of this, there's a Maram Mintz was quoted in the Maram Mintz is quoted in the Bar Heitev in Siman Reish Yud Tes, and he says the following: a child cannot say l'chayovim. He's not chayovim. When we say Birchas Hagoyim, when we say Hagoyim l'chayovim tovus, the child is not chayovim, is not guilty, and therefore you can't accept. He cannot say the bracha. Perhaps the father should say, if a child had a life-threatening situation, perhaps the father should say, because it says sometimes, it says, why a bon of shalodom mesim, that person loses a child because of their sins. So perhaps the father should say the bracha hagoyim l'chayovim tovus. So Maram Min says it's not always the parents. Sometimes it could be, and he mentioned the concept of Gilgul. It could be that this neshama has an account to settle from a previous Gilgul, and therefore it's not for sure that it's not the father's chayovim, because it could be the child's own destiny had this in it. And therefore it remains unclear. So the father can't say Birchas Hagoyim, and the child also doesn't say Birchas Hagoyim when they are a child. And when they grow older, also we don't know, because who says it was? He wasn't the chayovim then, because perhaps it was his father's. So it remains unclear. And bottom line is that the child will not say Birchas Hagoyim when he turns bar mitzvah. We're going to question number 5, and here's a case of a Jewish man married a non-Jewish woman, and subsequently they had a child, and after that she went through gear, a proper gear, and the boy also, because he was born to a non-Jewish mother, the boy also had gear, and brought up as a frum family, very beautiful, nice frum family, and now the boy is now engaged, getting married shortly. Question here is, what do you write the name of this boy in the ksubah? Do you write the biological father, or do you say the halacha it's not his father? The halacha Gershon, this guy has no father, and therefore you should write Ben Avram. Of course, the father is not keen. The biological father is not keen to write Ben Avram Avinu on this thing. Often people have totally forgotten and not aware that they are. This is their background. So speaking, one shouldn't be writing the biological father's name. Maximum, what you could do, like you will do in a case of adoption, you'd write Ben so-so Hamagadle. So-and-so was the one who brought him up. In that way, you mention the biological father without going too much details. Anyone who's a little bit more learned will see that this was a case of there was some history there, and okay, fine. That's one way of getting it. But b'diavad, this I have on the computer. I have the sefer Mishpat Ksubas or Mishpat Ksubas, an 8-volume set about writing ksubas, and he talks about this situation, and he says, what is the problem with this document? This is how this boy is known. He's known as the son of this person. Yeah. And by the way, for Aliyah L'Torah also, there's a little bit of leeway on that. In Chassitzchok, etc. So it's nothing. It's not inaccurate. It does not reveal the Gerus history. Who said that a ksuba which doesn't divulge that there's a Gerus in the background, that makes the ksuba invalid? It is not the right thing to do. The ksuba, if there is a gerus, it should be on the ksuba. That's the correct procedure, but that does not invalidate the ksuba. So that's how he writes. It shouldn't have been done that way, but it does not invalidate the ksuba. Right. Let's move on to the next thing which I have on the list, and that is when you say Shema and you're wearing glasses, is it necessary to remove your glasses? So, no, I don't think it's an amazing, very serious shaila, but it is addressed there's a sefer called Onidu from Rabbi Yom Zohar. He addresses this question, and he says that you do not need to remove them. The main idea when you close your eyes is to help you focus more on the Shema, and therefore he doesn't see that it makes a difference whether you take your glasses off or not. So he says it's not necessary. Okay, we're going on to the next question, and that is question number 7. There is a rule that if you after the changeover to Talamot, etc. So if you're not sure, like many of us may daven with what we call autopilot, say they probably said the right thing, but after 30 days, you probably didn't do the right thing. Probably you followed what your habit is. After 30 days, your habit will have changed to the switch over. So here it becomes a little. It becomes a little bit confusing because there's Talmud Motor and there's the same Mashav Ruach Merid Geshem. Mashav Ruach Merid Geshem in 30 days is more than 90 times because you've got Musaf on Shabbos, and also and then you also have the 2 day the Musaf of so it's a little bit more than 90 times. In the Saint Alamoto, on the contrary, it's less in 30 days. It's less than 90 times, days or 90 times. So I've just been looking through some kind of halacha list, and there he says that by Talamoto, he says it should be 90 times. Now, obviously, it's saying that 30 days is not enough because you have to have 90 times. Now, this is written by the Derech HaChaim, and this is how it's quoted in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, to say that for Saint Halamoto, you have to have 90 times, and 30 days is not good enough. Actually, this is not a straightforward thing, and there are poskim, and that's the impression also for the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe does not talk about this in the Saint Halamoto. Let's get this clear. In Siman Kuf Yud Daled, the discussion is about Masha Baruch Meir Geshem. In Siman Kufyut Zayin, the discussion is about Saint Alamotar. The 30-day discussion in the Alter Rebbe is only in Siman Kufyut Daled. He doesn't talk about it at all in Siman Kufyut Zayin. So he doesn't address the Saint Alamotar. But the impression we get from the Alter Rebbe and other poskim is that 30 days, even if you miss a day here and there, is going to change your chazaka. You're going to get used to the new the new way of saying things in 30 days, even if you don't have your 90 times. So one should be following that. And bearing in mind, you're talking here about Suffolk about brochel abatola. In other words, although you can say you should bow down to Tfilas Nadava, enough, and you don't have to have 90 times. As I said, there are poskim. It looks like 30 days would be good enough. We'll move on. Going to a question, a shliach asked me this coming. He's doing an event on Motzei Shabbos. Is he allowed to have goyim preparing the tables, cutting vegetables? No melacha, but just hachana. May they do so on Shabbos. So the preparing on Shabbos for after Shabbos is a issur d'Rabbanan. So l'tzorich mitzvah, shvus d'shvus l'tzorich mitzvah is permitted. So to ask a guy to do an issur d'Rabbanan for a mitzvah need is permitted. However, the Alter Rebbe is quite clear, Kutras Achron, that this is only b'diavad, it's not a lechatchila. You cannot rely on this lechatchila. So therefore, what I said to him is, if you can manage to do the preparation before Shabbos or after Shabbos, you shouldn't be allowing and asking for them to do the preparation on Shabbos. If the circumstances are that you cannot manage without this, then that would be permitted on the basis of shvus de shvus l'tzorech mitzvah. Okay. Number 9. So this came up the following. Some time back, I wrote an article about Amiral and to do something for you on Shabbos, or for that matter, on Yom Tov. So actually, following on from the last discussion, I had written there that it's the second night of Yom Tov, and you'd prepared a candle, and your candle went out before the end of the first day of Yom Tov. The Muslim woman wants the bench lit. She doesn't have a naked flame. So I'd written that you are allowed to ask a goy to strike a match, because striking a fire, igniting a fire on Yom Tov, I wrote as midrabanan. And therefore, to ask a goy to strike a match, that's shvus d'shvus, l'tzorech mitzvah, so that would be permitted. So on Chabad.org, where this article was published, there's a feature for comments. So someone wrote there a comment that what you wrote, that Yom Tov, striking a match on Yom Tov, is midrabanan, is untrue, because the Mishnah Berurah says it's min haTorah. So I confess that I did not know that Mishnah Berurah. I do have the volume on my shelf. So I looked it up, and actually the Mishnah Berurah in Siman, the beginning of Tov Kuf Beis, he brings the Taz. The Taz there, Taka, he has some diuk. He wants to, the Lashon Rambam, he wants to come to a conclusion that there's no heter, even min haTorah, to strike a match on Yom Tov. Having said that, I wrote that I did a bit of research. I found that in passing, the Chazon Ish he says that striking of matches on Yom Tov is a shvus, is a rabbonon. I looked up Encyclopedia Talmudis under the entry of Moilid, and there he says, consensus is that it's Issa de Rabbanon. And I was just thinking that to make it osir, it has to be a malacha. Is making a fire a malacha? Is making a fire on Shabbos a malacha? So there's a machlokas in Gemara where they have ora lelav yotzes or have ora lechalik yotzes. When the Torah says, "Do not make a fire on Shabbos," does that mean it becomes one of the lamates malachas? Or it's a separate, and it's a separate thing, like not to carry out of the tchum, etc. It could be havora lelav yotzes. You get malchus, not have to bring a korban. If havora lelav yotzes, that's only for Shabbos, nothing to do with Yom Tov. Elamai, you're following the sphere svore, the havora, the chalik, the havora is one of the lamates malachas. And somehow you're saying that it's awesome in HaTorah on Yom Tov. And the Ataz's argument is that the things which you're allowed to do on Yom Tov are things which you have immediate benefit. But lighting a fire is going to cook your food and later be able to eat. It's not a direct benefit. That seems to be how the Taz is concerned. I'm not so confident with that. You can strike a fire on Yom Tov to be able to read with the light, and you have a benefit right away. So at any rate, there is such an opinion, but there is an opinion, therefore, that striking a match in Yom Tov is also in Torah. It's a very, very much a minority opinion. And to finish off on this, when it comes to Amiru L'Nochri, the rule is that whenever there's a machlokas in halacha, and we are machmir, when it comes to Amiru L'Nochri, we can be makel. So, for example, I sometimes used to get asked about relying on the aid of in Northwest London. So as a policy, I say I'm not going to answer you because it's a territorial issue. I don't want to have the Lubavitcher Rabbanim over there have to say that, Lubavitch said it's okay or not okay. So leave me out. But then they ask, can I have a goy wheel someone on? I say for a goy, you can argue whether it's a kosher for a yid. But for a goy, I can rely on the lenient opinion, yeah? So if there's machlokas, whether it's valid or not, but at least for Amir L'Nochri, it's valid. Our last thing for today is about the saying that the parsha of Shema in Rabbeinu Tam's. In other words, when you're putting on tefillin, not for in Zman of davening, and you've already said Shema in good time. The same question would be on Tisha B'Av afternoon. If you put on tefillin, do put on tefillin then about why do you have to say the three parshas? And last week I quoted a Maram Sheikh who discusses that question. So my son-in-law in Chicago, he sent me a reference to a Sikha of the Rebbe, Achron Shel Pesach, Tovshin Membeis. So the Rebbe in that Sikha, and this is a hemshech from Yud Aleph Nissen, asks the question, we have Taryag mitzvahs, and when we have a mitzvah, one of the mitzvahs is Sipur Yotzias Mitzrayim. That's one of the Taryag mitzvahs. There's also a mitzvah of Zechiras Yotzias Mitzrayim. And if you noted, the first Rashi in today's Chumash, today's Parsha, was to tell you there's a mitzvah of Zechiras Yotzias Mitzrayim every day. And every day we say in the Sheish Zechiras, the first of the 6 is the Bantis Yem Tzeis from Meretz Mitzrayim Kolim Echayev. There's a mitzvah of Zechiras Yotzias Mitzrayim. So the question is, why is that not listed in the Taryag mitzvahs? So again, Sipur Yotzias Mitzrayim is, and Zechiras Yotzias Mitzrayim on a daily basis is not mentioned in Taryag mitzvahs. And that was the question that Rebbe is addressing. He quotes a certain Rosh Hashiva, and he doesn't give a name, who had said, and his Talmidim had written down his Torahs, that he had said that there's a machlokas whether you have to say Yetzias Mitzrayim by night. And this seems to be linked to whether you're going to say Yetzias Mitzrayim b'Mos HaMashiach. If you say that you have to say Yetzias Mitzrayim L'Moshe Mashiach, then you don't have to say by night. If you say you have to say by night, you don't have to say L'Moshe Mashiach. So if you pass and there's a chiv to say Yetzias Mitzrayim B'Leilos, that opinion would hold that there's no chiv to say Yetzias Mitzrayim when Mashiach comes. If so, the Rambam has a policy that the mitzvah is only temporary. It's not going in the Taryag mitzvahs. If so, therefore, Yetzias Mitzrayim doesn't apply loss at love, right? And therefore, you don't have to. It's not listed in Taryag mitzvahs. The Rebbe is extremely unhappy with that chiddush, and to the point that he says it must be the Talmidim who wrote it down didn't fully understand what the Rosh Hashiva was saying, and because it's to say that there's in this chiddush that when Mashiach comes, you won't have to say the Parshas Vayomer doesn't seem to have any backing anywhere. Bekitzer, what the Rebbe says is the following. It's Medaik in the Rambam beginning of Hilchos Krishma. And I think I mentioned this last week. Why do we say Vayomer? Is it that's not because of Parshas Tzitzis? Because Tzitzis, okay, well, why don't you have we can there's many mitzvahs. Why do you have to say Parsha of Tzitzis every day? So the reason is because of Zechias Yetzias Mitzrayim. But there's many parshas about Yetzias Mitzrayim. So the Gemara in Brochus lists five mitzvahs, or five features which are special about this parsha. And that's why this, of all the parshas we talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, this was selected to say on a daily basis. You look in the Rambam, he says, Mipnei sheyesh bo schiras kol hamitzvahs. You have another. Then let's read this carefully. Shema has got the fundamental Hashem Echad. Achdus Hashem, Avos Hashem. That's Shema. V'hoyim Shemoya is called mitzvosai. It's fundamental. It talks about all the mitzvahs. Vayomer says Leman Tizkeru is called mitzvahs Hashem. It's fundamental. Zechiras kol mitzvahs. That's what makes Vayomer so important. That it's Zechiras kol mitzvahs. So there says the Rebbe. Okay. And the Rambam says these three parshas, they are called Shema. They are called Kriyas Shema. And in a sense, saying that they become a unit, a unit of fundamental points, which we are saying every day. Says the Rebbe. As a result, mitzvahs Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim doesn't need to be listed as a separate mitzvah because it's a component of the mitzvah of Shema. There's a mitzvah of saying Shema every day. The mitzvah of Shema every day also includes Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. Similar, says the Rebbe, in the case of building a Mishkan. We know in Parashas Truma it says build a Shulchan, and build a Menorah, and build an Oren, etc. In Taryag mitzvahs there's one mitzvah. Yosuli Mikdash. It's made of components. So the mitzvah is now, in our context, details. One of the details is Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. Therefore, it doesn't need to be listed as a separate mitzvah. That's the way the Rebbe answers this question. But meanwhile, what we gain from this is, you can see very strongly that the Shema in the three parshas become a unit. And if the reason why you say Shema in Rabbeinu Tam is because it says Kol HaKoreh Krishma B'lei Tefillin. Now listen carefully. It doesn't say Kol HaOyim Shema V'Hoya Im Shemoya B'lei Tefillin. It's a unit. Kol HaKoreh Krishma B'lei Tefillin. So, all right, to rectify that omission. In other words, if Rabbeinu Tam is right, you put on Tefillin in the morning, you read Shema without Tefillin. To rectify that, you're going to say Shema again. So Shema becomes a unit. So very, very interesting. In Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch Siman Lamed Daled, he said you don't have to say Shema in Rabbeinu Tam's, but in the Siddur, the way it's written in the Siddur, it's now 50 years since my bar mitzvah, and I don't know whether I mentioned this before in this forum, but when I went into Yechidus, very briefly, I went to Yechidus with my father, Baal Shalom, And at the time, Rabbi Sudak was not my shver at the time, pushed us to ask the Rebbe about Rebbeinu Tam's tefillin. And so I pestered my father to ask about Rebbeinu Tam's, and the Rebbe said, the Loshen, if he would commit himself not to have foreign thoughts, and he says further, forbidden thoughts is out of the question, but even arbitrary thoughts, it's only a issue of 10 minutes. On the Eitze zu dem ist reinzugucken und sieht, sei so Shema v'hoya mishemoya, seif zu vaydabe v'hoya kiviyacho. So the Rebbe didn't mention about Vayoyme. He says, sei so Shema v'hoya mishemoya, seif zu vaydabe v'hoya kiviyacho. To look in the Siddur for those, for when reading those parashas, that will be a solution not to have foreign thoughts. And then the Rebbe asked my father, does he have his own tefillin? And my father says, no. So he said, there or two. And that is that a year and a half later, or a year, this was Lamadal, this was Lamadvav. 2 years later, Purim, the Rebbe says it's a free for all. Everyone who has every bocher wants, he encouraged them to put Rebbeinu Tams. And then I went to Yechida 6 months later, and I wrote an apology that I'm not keeping the condition which the Rebbe had put to me. And so, trying to be polite as an Englishman. And so the Rebbe gives me a bracha, and then he comes to this line, and he says the following: in reference to that which you have written about your Rebbeinu Tam's tefillin, when a foreign thought enters your mind, you should raise your voice somewhat, and that will assist in driving away the foreign thoughts. So the Rebbe will help in that we should focus on what we have to do, and that's a line cooking and siddur. We should intensify our tefillah and our Torah, and the Rebbe will help in our desirables, which we are faced with in Klal Yisrael, should be driven away, and we should see a Geula Shleimah, Mashiach Tzedkenu, Beheri Ameinu Mamish, Matzmot Shabbos, should have a Yohu Mevaseh Toyim B'Seres Hagula, take it from Yad Mamish. A good tavach.
Amen. Good work.
Good work.
Good work.